Hi, everyone. This is Sonja Robinson hosting the S.U.N Talk Radio Show, Sustainable Urban Network, Saturdays at 3 p.m. on GODradio1.com for us to scale up our neighborhoods.
Tune in to S.U.N Sustainable Urban Network Talk Radio Show on GODradio1.com. Get up, get out, and get green. We can't let Earth pass us by. We got to scale up our neighborhood, y'all.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to S.U.N, Sustainable Urban Network, where we provide tips and information to help you improve the quality of your life as we address sustainability that directly intersects with racial, social, economic justice, as well as equity. Today's show is a little different. This show today was previously scheduled a couple weeks in advance, not knowing of the climate and the fever pitch of our country. And so just understand that our flow will continue, although we are adjusting to address this very important, relevant, and unfortunately painful topic of racial justice here in the United States of America. I have a fabulous panelist, including my co-host, S.U.N, representing our youth. That's, again, in our society. We have many other panelists within our community to have more of a breadth of discussion and experiences, from a former Black Panther to an attorney to an ally as well that is standing up for social justice, and a community member, an activist in our community here in San Diego, as well as an educator and professor that also has a lot of experience here with criminal justice. So for today's show, I definitely, as I do normally, we will go ahead and address, or I'll share the quote, which is a reflection. So today's reflection is: tolerance of injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. We are caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied in a single garment of destiny. Whatever affects one directly affects all of us indirectly. And of course, that is by our beloved Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Before we move on, I would like to respectfully take 8 seconds, a moment of silence, to give honor and respect to those 8, almost 9 minutes that cut the life of George Floyd. And before I do, I will call off 8 names. As we know, there's a mass more that unfortunately has experienced this tragic crime and just violent behavior. George Floyd, Eric Gardner, Trayvon Martin, Michael Brown, Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor, Tyrone West, Sean Reed. And I will ask for 8 seconds of silence, please. So I haven't done this before, but what I will do at this moment is just say a quick prayer. I am very emotional. This has been a challenge show to prepare. The preparation of this show, like I said, was scheduled 2 weeks ago and for this week, but it was on a totally different path than what we're currently experiencing in our country. It was more on the path of a training perspective of how to make some improvements incrementally, but we understand that transformational change is required. So I don't really know what I'm going to say, but I just need to level set even myself, because it was a challenge and difficulty leading up for today for me. So just dear Heavenly Father, I just pray and ask, Father God, that you bless and heal our land, Father God, and you touch the heart, mind, and soul of every person and give respect, support, and love, Father God, where it's needed in every community across this country. In Jesus' name I pray, amen. All right. So as I stated before, our topic is racial justice. And again, before we move up, we like you to scale up your neighborhood. And again, scaling up your neighborhood is providing information to make improvements. And so our focus on today, of course, is going to be racial justice, because it's uncivilized as a society to marginalize any group of people. And so all Black communities and neighborhoods and people need that scale up in their lives, in their neighborhoods, as we address this. For the unfortunate family loss, I want to pay honor to those, the family of George Floyd, as well as Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, and like I said, so many others. Just want to let them know that they're in our hearts and prayers. So we set a reflection. So the next thing we normally do is we go into our sun enlightenments, which I made adjustments for today's show. So for our sun enlightenments, is one, is be responsible with your resources. And two, take the state of our social and racial justice climate seriously here in this country. Three, don't wait for others. Do your part. So everyone needs to have a voice and to speak up. And if you have power to make a difference, then that's you doing your part. Four, give your best effort and do your best. Continue to love one another and providing the necessary movement that is necessary to change the course of this racial injustice. So we also do normally have a highlight. Again, my tone on this show hopefully will not have to be replicated, but it's just totally different, and it is in reflection of where we're at as a society. We do give our Sun Award for those that are champions for the environmental and climate justice movement, as well as provide fossil shade for those that oppose that movement. Now, one thing to be understood, that in correcting environmental justice does directly intersect and addresses racial, social, and economic justice. Racial justice itself can stand by itself. Environmental justice being addressed cannot stand by itself. So for today, our Sunshine Award, of course, are going to every person that is using anything they have to speak out, demand justice and righteous for this insane, uncivilized behavior that we have to address, that is a disease that's plaguing our country and lives and within our country. Without saying that the fossil shade for today's show is Derek Michael Chauvin. Date of birth is March 19, 1976, which is charged with the third-degree murder and second-degree manslaughter. And according to the complaint, he created an unreasonable risk and taking a chance of causing death or great bodily harm to George Floyd. Gregory Travis McMichael also ambushed Ahmaud Arbery. They, without question, have the fossil shade of today's show. Now, again, I normally talk about what's the latest. Well, I think we know what's the latest. Even if you don't have regular TV, somehow you understand what's happening and what is the latest and how it directs our public policy nationally and in each one of our neighborhoods specifically. I want to make a statement of in loving respect to honor the men and women of color, the Black community, of those that have died from the disease of America's racism in the United States, time and time again, and call on action by our leaders, our public officials, those that are in power, those allies that can have a voice to influence the change of how Blacks are being treated, the change of our living conditions, and provide equity by nation's promises of inclusion, liberty, prosperity, and dignity to every person. So who is shining for this show are the families in our communities that's suffering a loss. deepest and serious condolences, and that doesn't do enough justice. And hopefully we're going to discuss things to bring that full circle, that real justice is realized. So before I introduce our topic, which is coming up very rapidly, our topic supportive commentary, I want to bring highlight of those that are leading in this effort for racial justice. The NAACP, Color of Change, Black Lives Matter. The Color of Change put out a statement, a state of emergency to end war on Black people, addressing the harassment, the racism of accountable policing, and eliminate killings of Blacks. So for one, is to enforce policies to protect human rights of all people, require officers to exhaust all other measures before resorting to deadly force, require a duty for officers to intervene when other officers are inappropriately using physical force or when the use of force is no longer required. An open standard of proof for Department of Justice civil rights investigations for police officers to act in this manner. To fund reliable federal tracking and reporting of all incidents involving the use of deadly force by law enforcement, whether lethal or not, and require independent investigations in all cases where police kill or seriously injure other people. So today's topic is, again, racial justice, because without racial justice, we cannot have environmental and climate justice. So with our, on our panel, who we have is, like I said, we have a very breadth of speakers are featuring guest speakers, and they are our social avengers. So we highlight our climate avengers, we highlight our environmental avengers, but this panel here is our social avengers. And we will be discussing these issues. And before we do so, we have a quick theme song just to kind of set the pace of the questions and the discussions that we're going to have as though we're sitting around our kitchen table.
Oh, hurry up and let me go. Hurry up and let me go. 100% with the flow. I'm ready to blow. Hurry up and let me go. Hurry up and let me go. There's something in the water, something wrong. Something don't feel right. Something going on. But we strong.
So without further ado, I want to introduce to you our guests. So we have Nan Bruton. She is a former Black Panther as well as retired senior director of the Head Start organization there in Texas. We also have James Davis, an attorney. He was a graduate from UC Berkeley. He practiced civil rights, labor employment, criminal justice, the discrimination and sufferings and hostile working environments, as well as practices immigration law, and has a racial diversity training, Racism Understanding Us. We also have with us Dr. Darwin Fishman. He is a sociology and African American study professor at the University of, at San Diego State University, as well as the University of California, San Diego. And we have Andi McCleod. She is the co-founder of SURGE, which represents Showing Up for Racial Justice here in San Diego. She's also the leader of the Racial Justice Task Force with her church, the Unitarian Universal Fellowship. And hopefully we will be able to be connected with one of our civil rights community activists in San Diego, Miss Kathleen Harmon, which many of us in San Diego are familiar with Miss Kathleen Harmon. That is, she's a retired social worker, community activist, very actively and participates in our political California state party. Again, I think there's, we'll see, hopefully she'll be able to join us later. So normally I go ahead and just kind of pitch a question, but what I would like to do is just ask anyone on our panel to share how they're feeling and what they're thinking today. Nan?
Well, First of all, thank you for having me here. It's a difficult time.
It is.
I have a son, and when you think about what's happening to our young Black men, or just Black men in general, it brings a sadness over you, you know? I have to feel like there's hope. I have to feel like there's hope. And with that, I trust God for all things. I pray daily for the world that we live in. And I'm just hoping that, and I feel eventually, hopefully, prayerfully, things will take a turn. So there's hope. So I'm feeling there's some sadness, but yet there's some joy as well.
Thank you for sharing. And James, how are you feeling, and what are your thoughts today?
Well, my feelings today, well, first, I appreciate you for allowing me to be present today. My thoughts are this, that what happened to Mr. Floyd is not the only reason we're here today. There have been a lot more tragedies that have taken place in the past that have led up to this. And what we don't want to do is let the news media or the society or whoever discount what has happened in the past, because what has happened to Mr. Floyd, what has happened in New York, in Central Park in New York, where the white woman called the police on the Black man to threaten him. We can't forget that Lake Merritt, Oakland, Black people called for barbecuing in the park, at the gym. And these are things just that have happened recently. And so it's a culmination of all of that. And what we have to really realize is this affects our quality of life. And right now, the quality of life for African Americans is we're last on everything. We have the most, not just African American, brown people also. We have the worst education. We have the most poverty. We have the worst schools. We have the highest in prison incarceration rates. And this has become the norm in society, and people have started accepting that. And we have to change that.
Absolutely.
I'll stop right there for now.
Absolutely. And Dr. Darwin Fishman, can you share what your thoughts and feelings are today as we're addressing the topic?
Yeah. Thank you, Sonja. Thank you for inviting me, and I really appreciate your introduction. It's actually making me think, and this is kind of really the sad part, really, like, for me, really emotional, is when I was in college at UC Santa Cruz in the 1980s, in the 1990s, early 1990s, I remember Rodney King. I mean, I was out on the streets and raging, and I was really blessed that I ended up being in Santa Cruz, not San Francisco, because my friends in San Francisco were arrested. Most people don't know that when that rebellion started, more people were arrested the first night in San Francisco than LA, because of Police Chief Jordan. So I literally cut my teeth in college on this, and I just thought Rodney King was it. Like, we couldn't get any worse than that. Right. And I'm thinking back now, 30 years, it's like, wow. And I hate to say it, but on a certain level, it's like I am becoming numb to it. Like, I don't, with our reform, and I'm a part of the Racial Justice Coalition and been very active here in San Diego since I moved here 6 years ago with police reform. And San Diego is really stuck like in a 1950s mode. But in general, police reform has come a long way, but we still see these really significant steps back, which just make me question, again, how much we can really do. And it is really sad on that level, in putting in that kind of historical perspective. And, if you think back to Rodney King and how many cases we've had, just horrific cases now, police abuse and these fatalities.
Yeah, and you made a great point as far as saying the significant steps back. I definitely agree. I would have never guessed in the 90s as well that in 2020 that this is where we would still be. So I had no idea. Andi, please, would you please share with us your feelings and thoughts of how you're feeling today in relationship with what's going on?
I'm feeling so much. And what everyone else has been saying. And I'm feeling pain that is not really rightfully my pain, because it's the pain of Black and brown people and marginalized people whose lives, the lives that I haven't lived and the oppression I haven't had to bear. I'm feeling that pain that, although it affects me indirectly, as you said, so as Martin Luther King said so beautifully, it's a force. And many of the people in my group are feeling the same. Many people across the country are, and are wondering what to do. And I think there's a great as yet untapped source. I hope that we'll look back and look at this as a tipping point, the same way we looked at Selma as some kind of tipping point. And I'm committed to do whatever I can, while I can, wherever I can.
Thank you.
And I just want to say I'm sorry.
I appreciate that. Thank you. And so I would definitely circle back around and discuss, that tipping point and the tapping that you mentioned. But before we move on, I want to give my son an opportunity to share what his feelings and thoughts are about the climate and what's happening.
Yeah, I'm feeling angry and emotional. I also feel like it's also a breaking point because I see people that are not exactly people of color, like actually rioting and actually protesting. So I feel like we're finally starting to come to a point where we're going to wake up to this, and it's going to be more of a bigger change than we ever seen before, because a lot of white people, a lot of people that's not Black are actually starting to post about it and actually talk about it, and starting to expand. So yeah, but I also feel very heavy-hearted. Yeah.
Very heavy-hearted.
And Sonja, if I may, I expressed, when you asked me, I was expressing my personal feelings as of today. I was in San Diego, California, when the Rodney King riots happened. I was there for the National Head Start Convention. So I was a part of that. 1966, I went to the Texas Women's University in Denton, and I started following the Panther Party. And the same thing that the Panthers stood for back then, racial justice, stop killing our young men. It's the same thing today. Same thing today. And so when I graduated in 70 and left, that was my more direct involvement with the Panthers, the programs that they had, the feeding the hungry, the kids, health clinics. They even had a part in the sickle cell anemia program, which my granddaughter, who is a graduate of LSU, has sickle cell. She has the actual sickle cell disease. So the point that I'm making is that I was just reflecting on my personal feelings today.
Right.
But the way that I feel today, I've gone through that since 1966 or before. So I just wanted to kind of let you know that was just, how do I feel today? I feel sad.
Right.
I'm hopeful, and I believe that things will hopefully work out, but it's so much, it's just so much. I just wanted to add that was my personal feelings. But in terms of what has gone on from 1966 way back then to 400 years ago, we all share that pain. We do. Yeah.
And that's one of the things that came to my mind, is that when these things happen in our community, in other communities, particularly African Americans, brown people speak out, it's not seen as us fighting for our rights under the Constitution, or in America, our right to be free, our right to live and prosper. It's seen as a slave rebellion, and it's almost treated as that. And that's what you see happening today on the news. They're not showing that, are emphasizing that the death or the mistreatment of the African American, they're emphasizing, well, look what they've done after we've mistreated them.
Right.
You know, now they're rebelling against us, but wait a minute, and you hear this, well, you know, you can't act after somebody has attacked you or been violent against you. Well, that's the same mentality that they've had for 400 years. It's you must accept your position in society, and if you act out, then we're going to characterize you as a thug. And that's when, you know, when the looting starts, the shooting starts. That they've been saying that for years, and they've been hanging us for years. It's the same Jim Crow mentality that has been going on in this country since the beginning.
Yeah.
And attorney, one more thing. So what has the Constitution done for us as Black folks?
Well, I was having a conversation actually with James, and we were talking about the Constitution and things of that nature, which haven't not reflected and been upheld for our community. What are our thoughts about that? Who wants to chime in on that?
Could I go?
What was your question again, Sonja? I'm sorry, what was your question?
It's just about, you know, like what is the best way, I guess I'll rephrase it. What's the best way for us to put in particular, I don't even know really how to say it now, measurements, I guess, for the Constitution to be upheld, to reflect our communities, right? That our liberties, that we are free as well. I mean, I think it's just so unfortunate that a group of people have the luxury, and I have to say the word luxury, and I think that's a shame in itself, to roam around the country freely, right? But then you marginalize a group of people, and just even from just a visual sight, that you feel intimidated or you feel threatened. Well, that to me also has other implications as well, such as mental health issues, right? Because a normal person, unless something is being done to you, you're not, you know, you're told that your senses shouldn't go up. But going back to the question of the Constitution is, what are our thoughts about the Constitution not reflecting and being upheld to include the Black community?
As a lawyer, let me tell you my feelings on it. America has had one of the oldest constitutions on the face of the planet right now. And there's a problem with that because the Constitution doesn't keep up with the times. And what you have in the legal field, what you have is past precedents, what they call, and then an interpretation of what's been said, okay? The Constitution was written at a time when people of color weren't considered people, and it was based on white male privilege. And white males have been interpreting the Constitution ever since in a manner that favors them, okay? They may add an amendment here or a change there, but then that's just putting a patch on a flat tire. The Constitution is no good anymore. It needs to be rewritten to include things that are happening today in America today. With technology, with advancements that we've made as a people, with the changes in how people are looked, class, whether you want to say class or what people of color, people of gays and lesbians, women, all of us have made significant changes, movement in society, and we need a Constitution that reflects society now, okay? And we need a Constitution that is written for today, that everybody understands today. There shouldn't be a situation where white males can interpret a vague rule to mean whatever they want, and you have to live with that because you don't know what the law is until they tell you what it is, and we have no input. That is one of the reasons why Trump and the Republican Party fought so hard to prevent, well, first the Republicans prevent Obama from putting members on the Supreme Court and in the courts. And now that Trump has got into office, while they have put so many white male conservatives on that court to interpret what the Constitution says for us and how it will affect our lives. So we just need a new Constitution that is clear on its face, that is done based on today.
Yeah, I would come at it a different way, just to add with what my brother James shared. I would say this, because we don't like to come at this directly, which is if we really have a white supremacy at our core, in some respects, the Constitution is not going to matter. And in that sense, even if you got a Constitution through, that white supremacist core, even if they're not a majority in this country, I mean, they're armed. They're going to go off and do their own thing, kind of thing. And we don't necessarily like to address that, but I think it's clear that's what's going on. I mean, you have to really start with that in the sense of how deeply divided this country is, and then also things like how many people own weapons. I hate to put it in that way, but that really, and again, in some respects, is our core part, and how much we're drifting there, especially having a white nationalist as our president now. And in that sense, it can also really feel overwhelming. But I think this thing of trying to sugarcoat it and trying to go around on the side, that hasn't been working for us. And if anything, now we really are regressing. And I think there's really potential. It's like that crossroads. There's some really potential deadly turns we could take at this point. And I mean, I am definitely praying and hoping for the best. And we'll definitely see how it goes. And I think it's also incumbent on us that our community activists to help steer that in the right direction, because there's definitely some lethal directions that this can go really quickly.
So one of the things I want to address, Darwin, something you said that I have a personal issue with, and I would like other people to at least hear my position on that, and that's that phrase, white supremacy. I am a faith believer, and there's only one supremacy, and that's God, right? And so for me, when you define supremacy, it's a state or condition of being superior of all others in authority, power, status, sovereignty. God is the only one that's sovereign. So to even use the word supremacy with any race, to come before it is abomination in my personal belief. And so I would love to petition and ask people to stop using that phrase, because you're reinforcing a pseudo superior complex, and maybe consider the word white extremist, right? I mean, so a white extremist, I mean, these are extremist, behaviors, but to me, it's only one supreme. I received that lesson. Ironically, it was in Texas, and just understanding, knowing that it's only one that's sovereign. So, that's
it's a really good point. In fact, actually, I'll just say this to validate what you're saying. There's actually it's interesting, a youngin. Brittany in our movement that said she had this thing for her sign saying that you don't spell God C-O-P. It was very clever on one level, because on a certain level, the police do act like they're God, and in that sense, they get to determine people's lives. So I also get that dynamic, especially from the youth and young folks side. But I think you're right on another level, and I think it's true. And I think that I don't want, in that sense, defend the use of white supremacy, and what you're saying. But I do think we have to get the thing of the white mindset where they do think they're the most powerful. If we want to talk about superior race or whatever we want to use.
Social dominance. No, they are the social dominant race, without question. I mean, they are the social dominant. And so that is the more technical phrase. So somehow we need to probably add a swag to it and add another phrase to it or what have you. But just that, I mean, every time I hear it, I kind of cringe, right? I mean, and that's within in my space, because I really feel like that is misplaced.
And I'd like to say that, Sonja, to the answer to your question about the Constitution, as far as we are concerned, as Black African Americans, it's null and void. It doesn't work for us. It really doesn't.
How can we make it work for us, though? What needs to be in place for it to include us? I think that's probably more appropriate.
You have to have individuals like Andi. And I don't know her, but I feel in my spirit that she is there or is here to do what she can for what we're going through. And until we get hearts and minds changed, until we get rid of you said supremacy, but I'm saying the racists, but they are racist. Mm-hmm. It's all about racism. Let's call a spade a spade. It's about racism, okay? I mean, there's no way to sugarcoat that. They believe that they are better. They believe that individuals like us and Latinos and Native Americans and all of those, that we're subhuman. We don't matter.
Yeah.
That's what the racists really believe. Let's call it what it is. And I think I'd like to hear from Andi
I would say
on this point. I'm not trying to, hey, I get excited about it. So you know me, but I'd love to hear from Andi what she has to say.
Oh, well, thank you so much, Nan. Now I'll take this hot baby and run with it. Well, I've had experience talking about my discomfort with race with our surge group. And that is one great thing about it, is that we can get together and we can make bloopers. We can say those things that we can, dissect the racism and the things that we say and push through. Because I have to tell you, I'm a racist. I'm a recovering racist. I'm going to be a recovering racist all my life because I'm a white person who's grown up in one of the 50 racist states. And the stain happened as soon as I became conscious. And I'm always working to unload that knapsack that Peggy McIntosh talks about of white privilege, that it would be easy to get caught up in my own reaction to that. But I've learned that since it's not about me, my job is to get clear on what the actual facts of being white and Black in America are, and to work to undo racism every day with every cell of my body.
Right. Because racism, one more thing I have to say this, racism is a learned behavior. You're taught that.
Oh yeah.
Right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And it's so insidious. You live inside the system. You don't even realize that you
don't even know you're a racist, really.
No.
Until you actually do what you're doing now.
The only racists are bad people who do those things. And the problem is that just by being silent, by accepting the, my dad got a GI Bill, opportunity to go to college and buy a house. And I did not realize until I was in my 50s how much that put me ahead of a girlfriend I considered one of my best girlfriends. We never talked about race. So that means that we were never that close, although I didn't know it at the time.
Exactly.
Her family was in a totally different situation. And we're having a program tomorrow night called End White Silence that we're co-hosting with Surge, which is a wonderful our mother-sister group down in San Diego. And going to be delving into this because in the middle of our grief and our push to understand and overcome right now, there is, in the middle of this awful, horrible, inexcusable grief that grief for this inexcusable action, we are still going to wake up white tomorrow and not know what we can do unless we band together and learn from the organizations and the people in this virtual room who have so much more knowledge about the work that needs to be done, because you've been doing it for decades. I feel honored to be in Darwin Fishman's local meetings for Racial Justice Coalition, and to be working as much as I can as an accomplice to the group to end chokeholds in San Diego. We're going to be talking about the community of the Board of Supervisors' new budget, or their proposed budget includes something like, I want to say $38 million for the added on for the police department in 2020. So that just can't happen. And the only way it can happen is if white people as well as people of color stand up and say, no, this needs to go to mutual aid, to restorative justice, to all those things that actually will make the job of the San Diego Police Department easier and make us safer. Violent policing makes everybody less safe, including the police involved.
Exactly.
Andi, I really appreciate you being here today. Thank you. And I appreciate you sharing and being very candid. You said a few things that I found very necessary and really, I guess, I'm peeling apart, which you made a comment of being a recovering racist. I don't think I've ever heard that before, but I appreciate that, right? I mean, one, for you to even know at some point in your life, right, of your, of biases, of privilege, of a different lifestyle, and to say that you are a recovering, racist is something that, are you saying that there is hope that, we can have like race is anonymous or something? I don't know.
Yeah, I sort of just kind of like that kind of group. I think being aware of it and unhooking myself from racist thoughts when they come up. I mean, I know that this focus on the rioting over the death, on the dog over the birder, are all about devaluing the real crime here. And when people do-gooder white people like me see the deaths and the unprovoked deaths of Black people, thank God on social media now, because how would we ever have come to this point without knowing it about it? But when we see that video and then the riots begin, there is a temptation to say, oh, well, they deserve it. See what they're doing now. And it's a temptation that I used to hate myself for so much that I tried not to think about it. And that is a collusion in the white, what I'm comfortable with is white supremacy, but a white dominant kind of society to perpetuate that. We have to fight against that, because what is a person supposed to do who has been cornered and attacked and life threatened all their lives, and they're at the breaking point? I don't think anybody would act differently. And that's the real key here, is that, the temptation is to veer into the direction of seeing Black people as subhuman all over again. And we have to fight that, we white people, every step of the way.
Darwin, I would love to hear some of your thoughts in relation, because you have a lot of work with criminal justice, even some exercises. You was at an event earlier today, correct?
Yes, yeah. So I would start with that. We had our car caravan for pandemic times, trying to be safe, car caravan, and we did it at the mayor's house in Point Loma. And I believe it was the largest car caravan protest in San Diego. We had over 70 cars all honking, going in literally in a circle where the police had blocked off his house, and putting a focus on Floyd, a tragedy with him, and trying to remind folks here in San Diego that the chokehold is still legal. San Diego is one of the last major cities in the U.S. that chokeholds are still legal here. And it's not clear that if an officer did the same thing to someone here, like what happened to Floyd, if they would even be fired, since it is legal here. And that's part of, we're doing an educational piece. And then we're also trying to get city council to actually vote to end chokeholds. LA voted to end chokeholds over 40 years ago in the 1980s after they killed 16 African-American men. It's very strange that San Diego still hasn't done anything about this. Chicago, New York, all these cities have outlawed chokeholds. Gardner, the reason why that officer, even after 5 years, could finally be fired is because that was actually against their policy. When we've had people like Desiree Smith, her son was choked at Lincoln High School, nothing happened to that officer, no discipline. Even though that supposedly broke policy, you're not supposed to do chokehold with minors. He was 15 years old, and you're not supposed to do it on school grounds. And I don't think people understand how much San Diego in that sense is a powder keg, like just waiting for something to explode like that. So that's why we're actively pushing for this, encouraging city council, since we have council member President Gomez, and then we've got Monica Montgomery in charge of public safety and livable neighborhoods. We really feel like this is the time we should be able to pass legislation ending chokeholds in San Diego.
I totally agree with you. And so one of the things I find that a lot of the social dominant race is unfamiliar with is that the outrage on this extreme behavior, this horrific tragedy, but there are microaggressions, biases, and racism that Blacks and Browns in this society, in this country, have to, work through, try to overcome, deal with on just as a lifestyle, right? And so these microaggressions, I guess I have a question is, how do they enforce or reinforce the racial social construct? Who would like to, James, would you like to address that question?
Well, I can kind of, and it's going to kind of go back onto what was said before. What we have to, the concept that white people aren't aware and the system isn't aware that it is racist is, I believe, is false. I believe what you see taking place with Make America Great Again is telling you and telling America, mostly white Americans, that we want to maintain or take back the positions we have already had, okay? And maintain what I call, and some other sociologists call, the social norm, to where there is a system and where people know their place, okay? And in that system, white people are on the top and people of color go down. And people are Black or brown are on the bottom. And what we're saying is this entitlement that you're receiving must be stopped. And those who feel that they are superior may not necessarily want to give up that social entitlement. And I think that's one of the greatest things. It's not a situation where people aren't aware, because you see in politics, particularly, the way they are controlling the laws and interpreting the laws and putting people in place that allow the system to be maintained as it is.
So that's a really good point. Nan or Darwin or Andi, do you also want to chime in on these microaggressions, and either how can we combat them, as well as how do they reinforce the social construct here?
Yeah, I would just add, I appreciate you saying about microaggressions, but I would say it's because of course there's different levels of this. One of the things I would say, it's not, in some respects in San Diego, it's not even microaggressions. I mean, it's full frontal assault. One of the things I was really shocked by, and this really worries me because I think people have already forgotten about this, they're not going to talk about this, is Tasha Williamson running for mayor, a Black woman. It was like something like that could never exist, like a Black woman could be mayor in San Diego. It was astonishing how she was received as like some radical fringe person, when she's talking about the stuff about police reform now, like supporting a ban on chokehold, is really mainstream stuff. The other two folks that were supposed to be, labels Democrats, to me, I mean, how do you distinguish them from anyone else? And one of the things that I'll just say this about what I thought was really surprising about the reaction, but I guess I shouldn't have been surprised by the reaction to Tasha's campaign, is she openly talked about south of the aid. And she openly talked about power relations in San Diego and the way that resources are distributed, like for the 4th district that's predominantly Black and brown. And to me, if we're ever going to go forward and deal with race relations, that to me is the most honest discussion you can have. And if you can't have it in a mayor's race, or you label someone a fringe candidate that brings up those issues, to me, that's really scary. And again, I think part of it is we need to focus on the local struggle. And that's why I keep going back to things like San Diego and what's happening here. I guess I'm less optimistic about national stuff like the Constitution. But I think there is still a lot of room that we can do on a local level, and a lot of ability we have to do things like changing power relations and our race relations.
You made a really good point, Darwin, because on the show Sustainability, we do look at addressing things locally at home as from a local perspective, state, and then we also go nationwide, right? Because a lot of these things are not just isolated just to us, but then there could be very unique situations, as you brought up, that is very unique to San Diego or San Diego County. But I believe too, I agree with you locally, but I also would like to expand that even statewide with like Proposition 209, right? So from a state perspective, that Proposition 209 really harmed Black employment here in the state of California, right? So that was, you know, and I think also for the social dominant race to understand, you know, the purposes and reasons why our affirmative action is necessary, right? So if you understand the history or even the current state of what's happening, and so to have a, you know, Proposition 209 that really just gave almost like a reason to create more poverty for Blacks in the state of California, it affects every city, including San Diego, right? It affects every county, you know, in the state as well. So I definitely agree that on a public policy perspective. So now that you brought that up, it wasn't even a question, but it should be, is what can our current public officials, because there's been several mayors, governors that have came out and spoken as though they really want to address this issue. Can anyone suggest or recommend what they can do in order to create some equality and equity, safety, liberty for Black America?
Wow, that's a good question, Sonja. I'm not sure. And I say that because, you know, they only can have, and I'm speaking here locally of mayors, right? I mean, let's just look at the incident that happened a couple of weeks ago. Well, I'm in Texas, where the mayors are saying one thing, then the governor comes in and says something else. And the governor has, quote, unquote, all power. So, and I'm talking about the situation that we're in with COVID-19, you know, don't go out, don't do this. Let's hold this down a minute. People are dying by the dozens. And then because of the economic phase of it, the governor says, no, let them go out. So I'm just wondering, I mean, to me, it sounds good, but the mayors, the local mayors are very limited, in my opinion, on what they can do. It's good to talk about it. But when
I'm not talking about it. And then I want you to reach back into your Black Panther days then, because that was one of the specific directions that the Black Panthers actually formatted that framework and addressing it from a public policy perspective, right? In order to bring, I mean, like WIC came out of the Black Panthers, right?
Yeah. Well, but you see what happened to the Panthers too. You know, after a period of time, they were dismantled.
Well, of course.
Because the FBI said that they were an enemy of the government. Because they were enemies of the government. I'm sorry?
Any Black activist group that becomes popular,
exactly,
a terrorist organization, whether it's right now,
whatever it is,
Black Lives Matters is considered a terrorist organization.
Exactly.
You know, one of the things that they can do, and it goes to what Dr. Fishman is and Andi are working on. The chief of police, the sheriff, and the mayor can say, we will not allow you to use these types of chokeholds while police are citizens. Another thing that is along those same lines that they're fighting as they're fighting the ban against chokeholds is the ban against using cameras, having cameras active at all time to record and show the activities of the police. That is as important as banning the chokehold because cameras tend to make officers think twice and de-escalate their actions. And like you said, on the state level, these things like Proposition 209, these are things that are put in place to maintain the status of society. And these are things that they're fighting against to prevent us from being upwardly mobile. What sense does it make? And and hopefully you know, on the same page as Darwin, but what sense does it make for a police chief and a sheriff and a mayor to fight against their officers using a chokehold that almost every police department across the country has made against policy?
Yeah.
I think
so. What's the point you're making, attorney? I'm trying to follow that.
The point is, all they have to do is start saying, we are going to put in these measures or take these steps. We're going to make these requirements in our local police department, in our local sheriff's office. And the mayor is, and the police chiefs and the sheriffs are the ones who make those policies. And we have to have people in those positions who will agree with and enforce those policies. It's the whole concept of corporate culture. And corporate culture is a term that a lot of people, businesses use, starts at the top. And it's what that management will allow to take place of those below him, which forms the culture of that business, that department, or whatever. And when the chief of police or the sheriff and the mayor says, hey, wait a minute, I'm fighting against not allowing my officer to use this chokehold. I think he should be able to choke people. That officer is going to be out in the streets choking people.
Right.
I guess I don't fully agree with all of that, but I'm just looking at the power that they don't seem to have.
They do have it. I think they're just exercising and using it for their purposes, not for our purposes.
Okay.
You know, so you probably look like it doesn't exist because you haven't experienced with the authority they actually have to make things safer and better, because that is what they're supposed to uphold as being a public office, being a public official. They are supposed to uphold and help protect and improve the lives within their constituents, right?
Yeah, agree.
And that simplicity will continue until action from their constituents forces their hand. Transparency is so important, whether it's in cameras. Thank you for mentioning that, James, or whether it's at the voting booth. We don't think that our public officials are being responsive. We should vote them out and vote in responsive ones. There's no official is going to be perfect, but my new understanding of being a citizen since our last leader got elected is that it's not just about getting out the vote and doing what I can to promote social action. It's holding our officials accountable and not letting up until the truth prevails. And I want to thank you, James, for, I don't know if you knew it, but I felt very reached by what you said about how America and its white citizens like me say that we didn't know we were racist. On some level, I did. On some level, I knew that being silent and turning away, turning the page from one more unarmed Black death was wrong. And all I can say is that once you realize that, you just can't go back to the same place again. And thank goodness there's a lot of ways to be useful in the movement that's already been started and people are doing such heavy lifting, and people like Darwin, people like Yusuf Miller, the Racial Justice Coalition, the San Diego Alliance, so many more.
People like you, because you've made a big step in the most effective influence on people are people within their own social circle. I can't influence somebody outside of my social circle, no matter how much I run out in the street, jump up and down, scream and shout and bust out windows or do whatever. However, if somebody comes over to your house for a glass of wine and you say, look, come on, you know the reality of this, you have much more effect on that person than I ever will.
And that's one skill that I've had to learn, because, you know, when you've been nice and not called people out for so long, I actually have had to practice white disruptive. I've had to practice racism disruptive statements to turn a conversation in front of the mirror.
So Andi, can you share a statement? So as we're, as this can be viewed with others and other, maybe allies or those that may want to become accomplices or, our social dominant, citizens or not, or just residents here may want to learn or want to do something, but they're not sure, right? No. That they want to be a recovering racist too. Can you share, like, what are some of the phrases that you have used or learned to use?
Well, everybody wants a resident, right?
I don't like the word accomplices. It acts like they're doing something wrong. When you say a racial accomplice, no. What are the things you say when you talk to another person that will have them do the right thing? It's not about being an accomplice to anything. It's about doing the right thing every day.
Although I like the idea of accomplice because I think white people have to get used to just the fact of putting our bodies in different spaces sends a message. I think I mentioned that I've been asked to be in courtrooms as a sort of witness to silent advocate for justice going along proper lines in courtrooms. And at a pretrial hearing, I walked in with several other anti-racist activists into a hearing where the judge was not only allowing, but promoting, basically presenting evidence for allowing illegal search and seizure of a young man. And when I walked into that courtroom, the judge looked up and she got more nervous. And I mean, she was already a bit nervous because there were other white people that had come into the room before us. But that was a moment where I realized, wow, this is really real. Mm-hmm. This is just terrible that I could make that kind of impact. That there is such rot in the system that people have to be afraid of the transparency of.
So what's that phrase? Give us a.
Okay. I give you a phrase. Well, this is pretty hard for a white woman to say, for anybody who's used to being polite, I should say. And when somebody starts with something, you're not going to change a heart or mind in a moment. And in fact, I'm not trying to be, I'm trying to drop thoughts into people's minds, right? Because no one's heart and mind is going to change in a moment. And I have had people come back and talk to me. And, there's things like, have you considered that? Or one thing that I really like is, there are some such outrageous statements that people are emboldened to say now that this actually works quite a lot to say, well, I utterly reject that idea. And this is why.
You said what? Say it again.
I utterly reject that idea, that belief. And this is why. And, like a one sentence thing. And if you want to talk more about it, I'm available. Because the work, there's so much work to do. We can't spend it arguing with people who are just dying to have somebody argue with them and get on their favorite hobby horse. Mm-hmm. The main thing that we can do is hold up the flag and say, no, I'm planting this flag here for truth. And if you are not, if you're not on board, then you're not on board. But you got to know that people disagree with you. And one of the things that I've kind of moved away from the phrases because I've kind of put them inside myself and I respond more kind of authentically in the moment. But one of the things that started me on this path right now came from our racial justice task force that I serve on. I'm not the leader, there's a wonderful leader on it, at our church, Unitarian Universalists of San Diego. And we've been tackling books in our book club and movies, books like White Fragility, White Rage, Between the World and Me, things that are really hard. And so you want to talk about race, things that are hard to read on your own and digest on your own and get forward on your own. But if you have friends who are really looking not just to develop defenses against understanding, but really trying to dig deep into it, then I think that's an important part of the work, because strategies, that's one thing, but the work has got to be deeper and every day. And we've gotten to the point where we can just call each other in on it, you know, and say, you know what, I think that was something racist that you said. And that's where my dream is that we can get to a point in society where I can say something, and James, you can say to me, Andi, I think that was kind of racist. And I can say, oh my God, you're right, my bad. And it doesn't disrupt the larger march towards truth.
Right. Well, that what my diversity training is. It's not one of the one day or one afternoon trainings. It's a 6-week. We meet 2 hours a week and go over material and talk about material and talk about the issue, because a lot of people just don't have that opportunity to talk about race. Yep. And come to a good understanding, get the historical perspective on why I may be having these feelings, or why my parents or grandparents taught me what I believe now, and how we can get some tools for them to make change.
I'd like to say,
I have a question. How do we address the unconscious and conscious bias that refers to itself as intimidation? Like, how do we address that? If I can repeat the question if you guys didn't hear it. It says how do we address the unconscious and conscious bias that refers to itself as intimidation?
I can address that. You asking a question makes me think about, there was an article that just came out, and the title was along the lines of this, saying that what's the pandemic that we're not going to succeed, that we're not going to beat? And the subheading is Black men in a public setting. And in framing that in terms of how we think about a pandemic, in the sense that for us, being in a public space, we are feared. Law enforcement wants to control us. White women want to call the police on us. And it was lumping all that in there in that article. And I think that that's really key to address, because in that sense, it just gets out of the thing of law enforcement, but this larger issue about race relations. And I think it goes back to Andi, what she was bringing up. A lot of it really has to be done by the white community, how they see minority races. And in that sense, the onus really isn't on us. We are doing the best we can to survive. So, you know, and clearly the progress we have made, again, it's just can easily be evaporated. And it's a very difficult part. Hopefully we'll begin to get, I would say, hopefully much better leadership from the white community, and more of those voices that are out there that are really serious about race relations, leading the country.
Absolutely.
You know, see, this conscious versus unconscious, when we're looking at the situation that happened in Central Park, when we look at the situation that happened in Oakland, at Lake Merritt, when we look at the situation of the Black family at the swimming pool and the housing project, we look at the situation of the brothers at the gym working out, and you have white people come in and say, well, I want to use that gym, or I want to use that swimming pool, or I want to be in this park, that my dog wasn't free, however, and having that African-American person, they know that as soon as they say, I'm gonna call the police on you, that is a threat. It's not unconscious, it's not subconscious. They know that if a police arrives on the scene with a Black person and a white person, that Black person is going to be the one that's going to have the problems, no matter who's right or wrong. And this is so. Exactly. This is not something that's not known or not understand. They understand that well, and that's why they use it in the way they do. Okay, so this concept that they didn't know that they were doing it, or unconscious. No, they know what the state of the system is. Everybody knows what the state of the system is. That's why they can use the bullying. They know that police aren't there to police them. They're there to police those who are different than them.
So
of color.
So James, you made a good point, and even talking about bullying, right? Because from a psychological even perspective, right? The bullying, the harassment, the violence, and even in a lot of cases when we're looking at it from more of a social or psychological perspective, is that, you know, are you a threat to harm yourself or others? Are you a threat, right? So I'm just still trying to understand like the barbaric savage, behaviors that are threatening, our communities. And it's beyond just bullying, right?
Well, see, but part of the problem that we have now, and it's part of, because see, I was a young Black Panther, and I grew up in Oakland with Huey Newton down the block from me, okay? So this whole concept that we have, and what we're doing now, politically correct, being soft and giving people the benefit of the doubt, we got to start throwing that out the door.
Absolutely.
These people know what they're saying and know what they're doing, and that's why they are on the rise right now. When Trump says "Make America Great Again" and has white America rallying, what does that mean? That means go back to what? What are we looking back? What was great about the 50s and the 40s and the 30s, or what time as far as for the Black community? So, when they say, if you don't leave this gym, even though you have your officers here just like me, I'm gonna call the police on you. I mean, they know exactly what they're saying in these cold words and things, and we can't give people the benefit of the doubt. That has been the problem. Saying, well, maybe they're just doing it because they don't know. No, people ain't that ignorant. They're the supremists, remember?
No, I don't know that.
But I don't
know that at all.
That whole concept that we're not intelligent, maybe they think we're not intelligent enough to recognize that they doing this stuff because they know that they can do it.
It's intentional. We know it's intentional, right? That's why we have all these different, institutionalized, systemic, racism. We're talking about the things that are the most blatant, the most tragedy. But like I said, it's these microaggressions that we have to, learn to, overcome, try to navigate on a regular basis.
So how do we solve the problem, attorney?
How do we solve the problem?
Yes. How do we?
Okay, this is. I look at it like this. Okay.
Okay.
If you have an arsonist burning up America, and that's what it is. Every time they choke one of these brothers to death, shoot one of these brothers, beat one of these brothers to death, that starts a fire. What you see burning out there today, okay? If you do not arrest or attack that arsonist, that fire, that he will continue to set fires is what we're seeing.
Okay.
And when I go back to the Constitution, it's like this. I got a suit on right now that I had custom tailored to fit me, which would be the equivalent to the American Constitution. I can take it over to Darwin and he can wear it, but it don't fit right. You see, it don't fit him. And that's the situation we're in right now. We need a constitution that fits America today.
I feel like we need like consequences that's actually like scary for like the oppressors, for like the white people that like don't fear their consequences. I need many consequences of like, wow, I can actually get this taken away from me. I can get my freedom and everything. We need to actually hold them accountable and actually give them consequences that they actually fear. So like they're like, oh, you know what? I'm gonna double think. Let me overthink this. I don't want to actually take this man's like this man of color or this black brother that's walking. I don't want to hurt him or kill him because I have some consequences I can face. They need to fear that. They need something to fear. That's what I think.
Right. Well, but
part of the
first we have to do. Society has to give us value. Okay. Yeah. We don't have value or equal value with others in society. That's why, and you have to look at the root and the stem of where everything came from. And, you know, slave police departments come out of slave patrols. You see, that's where they originated, slave patrols. The slave patrols wasn't going after white folks, and they ain't going after white folks today unless they have to.
Yeah.
For the most part. And the white folks that they go after are those who tend to be less fortunate, on the ones that they consider socially undesirable. But then once you start moving north from out of Chula Vista and National City, only person in police is stopping is like their brother that they did earlier this week, who was sitting in front of his condominium waiting for somebody to get off of the train to go up to home with him, and police come and jack him like that. That's, you know,
Yeah.
that would never happen to a white person in that same situation.
Okay, here's my
yeah.
take. Okay, Professor, let me say this, then you come behind me. And I'm not trying to, I just have to say this because I'm sitting here listening. 6 years ago, when the situation happened in Ferguson, the young man was gunned down. Michael Brown. We had this same conversation that we're having today. 6 years. Now, 6 years have come, and another man has been before our eyes. There's no doubt about the fact that he was murdered. And we're having the same conversation. How do we change? I mean, what do we do to make some progress, Professor?
Right. So I would just add what Nan just said, this and what James said by saying this. Of course, you know, the sociological thing is my professor, you have to do it with a power analysis. And we have to first, of course, admit that, you know, white males still control this country. The most powerful positions in this country are still white men have them disproportionately, whether it's in things like Senate being 98% white, CEOs being 99% white males, so on and so on. So that's the dynamics in the sense that if you try to change the Constitution and you still have white men sitting at the table, you're going to get the same product. So that has to be a part of it. The other part I want to bring up, going back to Sonja's part about policy, and especially since I'm wearing my NCOBRA shirt, and NCOBRA is part of the National Reparations, National Coalition of Black for Reparations in America. And we've been fighting for reparations since, you can talk about formally, since the Civil War, and we were promised 40 acres and a mule. And the issue in that sense is that for us, we're still not getting the resources that we deserve and that we should have. And we need to be honest about that, because on a certain level, it is about the resources and being able to get it. And that I put this and then add the local part. So for example, our county government in San Diego has millions of dollars in rainy day fund that they basically they claim to be using for rainy day, but they're basically denying to people in our community for things like mental health, things like education, things like food that could be given to them. And so we got to acknowledge that the struggle in that sense is very real on a local level. And again, I'm picking on the county. The county has not just been, you know, quote unquote, like a partisan thing with Republicans. The 5 people representing the county were 5 white people, and we're supposed to be in a majority people of color county. So in that sense, if we're the majority, we've got to find a way to seize power, or at least more power, and it's got to translate into changing our lives. We should be able to get more resources, and that's okay. And I think we have to acknowledge that and be comfortable with that. The fight for 15, raising the minimum wage, that gets more dollars in our pockets. There's a majority of people of color that are getting the minimum wage here that are in poverty. So I think for me, you know, that's what I would like to see, more acknowledgement of that kind of truth. I'd love to see it from our political leaders like Gomez and Montgomery saying we need more money south of the 8 and we're going to take it. It's our time.
What would you suggest for those in the power to reinforce protecting the constitutional rights for Black Americans? Like, I can repeat that question if you didn't.
Well, the Panthers did that through guns and protecting the community. So I'll turn it over to the Panthers to respond to that.
That is, see, people don't realize it or don't want to admit it, but that is the reality of America. When they told these white folks, you can't go to work, you got to stay home because of COVID-19, and they started showing up at the state houses with their AR-15s and AK-47 saying, social distances, we don't care, we want to go back to work. They opened up the country.
Yep. But how is that? Okay, real quick, James. So I have a strong issue with that too. When you said you go into a public state building with AKs, rifles, gun, artillery, how is that not threatening? Like, how is not, you know, because your position is to threaten, to intimidate. So
white terrorism.
So how can you run
This is the difference. The difference is this. That man who went up there with his gun and said, I'm gonna die for my rights. Okay, I'm gonna fight for my rights. I'm a white American, we took this and I'm gonna fight for this, and that's why I got this gun. That's why the Second Amendment is here for me to fight and die for my rights.
Yep.
And until our community is willing to say, okay, just like the Black Panthers did, just like there's some groups in Texas, Louisiana, Mississippi, of brothers who were walking around with guns saying, I'm gonna protect my neighborhood because you won't protect us. You see, this whole, you know, going out to a march and things is as a social affair, it's not, okay? And that's how they have the mentality of the generations that we have today think it is. You see, and until they're ready to say, this ain't about being social, this is about me being equal, and I'm willing to die for that, as they did back in the day, then we just gonna be where we at.
Well, attorney, I have to ask you this. Then with the situation that you just explained in terms of I think you were talking about the situation in Michigan where the right-wingers showed up with guns and they were going to open up and all of that.
No, not just in Michigan.
I'm just saying, no.
In multiple states.
No, I'm using Michigan basically just as an example, but it has happened in a lot of states. Am I correct on that?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, so all I'm saying is that you're saying that if the Black man picks up a gun and patrols his neighborhood and says that we will no longer tolerate X, Y, and Z. Let's just be honest. What would happen to those brothers carrying those guns in today's society?
That's a strong point, right? And that's the contrast of reality.
That's the reality of it.
That's a contrast of the reality, right?
Yeah,
of how some can, roam around the country freely.
Exactly.
Yeah, but I hate to also put this out here though, and I'm on the side with James. I would say this: look what just happened when they burned down the police station in Minneapolis. The next day, the officer was arrested.
Right. Well, and it goes back to what I'm saying is that they don't see the situation that we're in right now as Black and brown people fighting for their rights that they should have in the United States. They see this as a slave or servant uprising that needs to be quelled.
So I think what you just said, James, is probably the mentality that's creating why we're still here in 2020. And that's a good point. And because we don't have but only a few more minutes left in addressing what you just said, I also want to ask, how can we address the source of some of these racial biases, right? How can we, what are some messages that we can provide now to our listeners that are growing up with diverse backgrounds to accept the demographics, in our countries? How can we address the source of these biases where there's this contrast of opportunities, where there's a contrast of safety, where there's a contrast of your rightful place based on your value and your character, not just, unfortunately, still the color of your skin. So what is it just do around? What are some of these sources that can address this racial bias?
Get a camera, and you need to have everyone.
It's more than just a camera, though, right? This is deeper than just a camera.
You would start documenting the incidences and what is going on. If you ain't gonna pick up a gun, pick up a camera.
I think that you have to have a change of heart. Yeah. And my example would be that of Andi. Until you can openly admit, because you're either a racist or you're not a racist. There's no gray area about that. And unless
I'll give one more category. You could be a recovering racist. I just learned that.
Okay.
I love that. We can have you're a racist, you're not a racist, or you are recovering. So those are three categories now.
Three categories. And I was speaking of Andi because it takes strength to acknowledge what she has acknowledged today. Mm-hmm. And so until the hearts and minds and souls are changed, we will be in this epidemic that we're in. That's my take on that.
I think that we need more communication with, if we can, with like the racist people, or even the recovering racist people, or even like there's people that like are committing these crimes and everything. If we can actually find a way to communicate or whatever, and like eventually, I don't know, like I feel like communication is really the answer, one of the answers to
It is, Elijah, but the hearts have to be changed.
But I know it's not always like
400 years of trying to communicate.
Yeah,
Think about it. It's been
So
400
therefore you have
years
to have, therefore you have to have a change of heart. You have to have a change of your mind, your mindset. You have to have a change of your soul, your innermost being. And you have to acknowledge that I don't like that person because he or she is Black. He or she is Latino, Native Americans. I want to change that. And that change only comes from within, brother attorney. Am I right?
Yeah. Well, and I agree with James. I would say not just the thing of picking up a gun or a camera, but believe in yourself, believe in your confidence that you are worthy of being human and that you're connected to your people. In terms of for our community, I think that's really critical, and that it's not going to be immediate gratification. This is going to be a long haul, and we're going to have to keep doing this no matter how exhausting it is. We're going to have to fight for our rights, and all you have to do is think about, with Floyd, if that was a white male in a business suit, you better believe police policy would have changed the next day through the entire country. That's ultimately our goal, in the sense that we should be treated with the same amount of dignity and respect.
So, Darwin, I agree, but I believe our community has, I do believe that our community, we have self-respect. We know our value, but it's being accepted with the social dominant race as far as the value and the respect that we deserve for being human. Andi, could you please provide information of how to address the source of this racial bias?
2 minutes.
Again, I get the fun questions.
What'd you say?
So many things have been going through my mind. I think the onus is on us to do the work and to do it without putting attention on ourselves. That's a very, very difficult thing for a dominant group to be. To not get caught up in our own emotions of shame and entitlement about any place we have in the movement, but just to focus on the prize, as Darwin said, and on the change, as James said, and to know to keep on learning, keep on putting ourselves out into risky experiences where we might find out that we're not the people that we would like ourselves to be seen as. But very importantly, it's important that we do that work as much as possible among ourselves as the dominant racial culture, to avoid, white people out there, please don't go running to a Black person to ask them to explain the movement to you. They've had too much weathering, too much that they have to take. I see people nodding, you have to take too much time just to live through the stress of driving while Black and being educated while Black and or brown or gay or whatever. But the thing that we have to do is get educated. And in our churches, it sounds trivial, but starting a book group can be a positive experience. Seeing a movie that like The 13th, which came out some years ago, but is still very topical and lots of people haven't seen it. And then to form groups to find out who the activists of color are in our areas and right in our geographical location, and what the issues are that they're fighting for. I thought I was a gun rights activist. I would say, gun protection activist. But then I realized that I talked to people who said that not everybody in the Black community views gun reform the same way. And it's so important for us all to sort of get on each other's pages. But we, white people, we've done the crime. We have to do the time to make a difference.
Thank you. Thank you. So we got 1 minute, guys. Any last remarks? 1 minute.
I've enjoyed it. As you can tell, I'm very passionate about what I believe in and what I've always believed in since I came to kind of understand. And it's been a joy, Professor and attorney and Andi and my cousins. I love you guys.
Love you too. Darwin and then James.
Yeah, thank you. It's been a really great exchange, and this is what we need more of, and I really appreciate it, and looking forward to continuing with working with all of you. So thank you for this opportunity to share.
Absolutely. Thank you. James, you get the last.
thank you for allowing me to kind of say my little piece, but then also put the question to you. When Darwin says you have to fight for your rights, what does that mean? Does that mean sitting at a table and asking for somebody to treat you better, or does that mean taking some type of action?
Yeah. All right, guys. Thank you. See you next week on S.U.N, Sustainable Urban Network.
Love you guys. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.